Recently, I've received several requests to discuss the Canadian housing bubble, and I think I'm going to break this into two videos. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss how the bubble actually came into effect, and the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a video discussing how the bubble will likely burst. Now, let's try to simplify this entire explanation by looking at the main actors in the situation. By looking at the actors, you'll get a pretty good idea of how this bubble is gonna burst and how it occurred. And you don't need to read a textbook on the subject, alright? So I can do a pretty good job of breaking down both the Japanese housing crisis and the US housing crisis in simple terms, but I still recommend that you look at those two housing crises to understand what's probably going to happen in Canada. I often say that if you want to know what's going to happen in the future, economically, look to Japan. They are basically walking in our future footsteps, if that makes sense. Everything that has happened to Japan that's bad is probably going to happen to the US, and therefore it's going to happen to Canada as well. So at one time, Japan was the top economy in the world, and then it came tumbling down through a housing crisis. And we saw a very similar effect in the US in 2008. They were at the very top of the stock market, never been higher, and then it all came tumbling down. Now the catalysts are pretty similar in Canada, but a little bit different. So it merits an explanation. We're going to talk about the bubble first. How was the bubble created? Now all bubbles are created through overbuying. When prices are risen or driven to such an extent to where nobody can really buy anymore, that's the peak of a bubble. They're too expensive and people are just done buying. Everything's overbought, and once people stop buying, demand drops. As demand drops, prices drop. And when prices drop, people panic sell because a lot of bubbles are investments, and a lot of them are leveraged with money that doesn't really exist in your bank account. Now, the demand is going to go down in Canadian housing for two reasons, and driven by two people. And it's the same two groups of people that created the bubble, alright? And I'm not going to say that it's the homeowners that are part of this. I'm going to say it's a corporation that's part of this, and I'll explain that in a second. It's a specific type of corporation. I'm not putting homeowners to blame, but they are kind of to blame because we are human, and as humans we have some very peculiar economic behaviors. But let's start with what most people like to put as the scapegoats of housing crises and housing bubbles. That is foreign investment. I'm going to use Vancouver as an example because it's simply an easier example to understand. Realize that not all of the housing prices being overbought is a product of foreign investors, but on that note, realize that part of it is. So let's talk about Chinese investors, and for that purpose we're focusing on Vancouver. Vancouver has a very large, bustling Chinese culture. It was the first time I ever saw a duck, pretty much skinned, hanging out of a window, was in Vancouver. Good memories. So here's why Chinese will invest in Vancouver. Well, you got the culture aspect, but you also got the aspect of it being Canada. Why is that important? First of all, your money goes a lot further in Canada. Right now, the Canadian dollar is trading at 75 cents US, whereas in the past it was almost 1 to 1. If you're a foreigner, you're going to look at America and you're going to look at Canada and you're going to see that your money goes a lot further in Canada. It's probably a better investment. And real estate is one of the only things in Canada, one of the only industries in Canada that's actually appreciating. Currency is going down, commodities are going down, but real estate's appreciating. So naturally, a Canadian investor like myself would look to Vancouver. Got the culture, got the country. I would like to go to San Francisco and buy a house there, but I simply can't. too expensive in terms of dollar cost versus yuan, and there's more regulations. So here's one of the keys of Chinese investment. If I want to take my money out of China, I have a limit on how much I can take out per year. And that is $50,000. You're not going to find a house in Vancouver for $50,000. So all of this Chinese investment that's coming into Vancouver, into the real estate market, is in a way laundered money. Because that money shouldn't be getting into Canada, but it does. Sometimes it's legal. Sometimes it's through a fund that's been built up by $50,000 per year. But many times it's not. Many times it's just a rich Chinese person contacting a local in Vancouver and getting hooked up so that he can buy a prime piece of real estate as an investment. Now, realize that that home is bought but not lived in. It's just a vacant property that's sitting there as a nest egg for a foreign investor. That's contributing to the problem of housing in Vancouver, and it's driving up the housing prices for the actual residents in Vancouver. That's a big issue. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the general idea is that the regulations on getting money from China to Canada, while strict, are not really enforced like they would be in the US. So a lot of foreign money that shouldn't be pouring into Canada is pouring into Canada, and Vancouver and Toronto and Alberta in particular. Now, that's one of the catalysts. But that alone shouldn't be driving this huge bubble. That's just a part of the bubble. The other part of the bubble is the same reason we had a bubble in 2007 in the US. Loans that shouldn't be given out to Canadians are given out to Canadians. In the US, if you wanted a loan, if you wanted to take out a mortgage for a home in 2007, all you had to do was go to a big bank and they would walk you through the process. They'd hold your hand and they'd say, no credit, no problem, get on in. Why? They wanted your money. They didn't care about your money. What they wanted was your debt so that they could sell it for more money. They can bundle it up in derivatives and sell it for more money. So they weren't interested in the actual home. They weren't interested in your repayments. They were interested only in the derivative. So if you are familiar with stock options, which is what I mainly teach about on this YouTube channel, a stock option is a derivative. It doesn't relate to the stock. It's more of gambling on the stock. You buy a you buy a call option. You want the stock to go up, but that's not because you own the stock. It's because you're betting on the stock. It's the same thing with the banks in 2008. Now in Canada, you don't have this. Actually, the banks are pretty strict in Canada, and they won't let you take out a loan if you can't pay it back. So the solution is this. Imagine you are a resident in Vancouver, and you love the city, but you just can't afford a house. No problem. You go to a bank, the bank rejects you, but they tell you, they might not tell you this, you might have to Google it, but they tell you that the bank is not the only place you can get a mortgage from. There's a group of companies called Mortgage Investment Corporations, MICs for short, that will give you the loan you want. And it's much for the same reason as the banks were giving out loans in 2007 in the US. A little bit different, but the key aspect is the same. They wanted your money. They didn't care about you paying it back. They wanted your money now. They wanted your assets. Because a MIC works much like a hedge fund. The more money they have under management, the more assets under management, the more the manager makes. A hedge fund works like this. Investors give me money. I, as a hedge fund manager, invest it well, or not so well. It doesn't matter. I don't care. I just want more money. Why? Because I get a management fee. Maybe 1%, maybe 2%. So if I'm taking a total of $50 million of assets and investing it, I'm making 1% of that per year. I'm making $500,000 a year. No matter how well or how poorly those investments do, I get my money. So the main goal of most hedge funds isn't really outperforming the market. Most hedge funds don't care that much. The main goal of most hedge funds is getting more money into the hedge fund. Now, a Canadian MIC is similar, but they're not taking money from the investors. Instead, they're middlemen. They have investors, but the investors aren't the ones that are creating assets for the fund. Instead, it's the borrowers. My goal as a manager is to get as many loans as I can. The more loans I have coming in, the more money I'm making personally, because I'm taking a percentage of all the loans I'm managing. Get that? So I don't really care if this guy can pay me back. What I care about is he going to take out a mortgage with us? Because if so, that increases the assets under management, and therefore it increases my bottom line as a human making money. That's the issue. Now the homeowners are in some way to blame because they're taking out mortgages that they can't pay back. And as humans, we have a very weird way of thinking to where we don't drill down to the actual cost of the home. Instead, we drill down to what we're paying per month. This is why people buy cars they can't afford. Because after the down payment, I only have to pay $500 a month and I can own a Lamborghini. Wow. It's the same thing with homes in Canada. The Canadian rules have a minimum down payment and they have a maximum amortization period. So what happens is you've got to pay some money up front, and then you also must pay back your loan within 25 years. That makes it actually harder to pay back the loan. So it's a pretty poor rule. I don't know who thought it. It's not logical, but that's what's in place in Canada right now. Got to pay it back in 25 years. Can't extend that. Sorry. So what happens is the people taking out loans, after they pay their down payment, they just subtract that. They don't care about the costs. And then they pay back, let's say I can afford $1,500 a month on my mortgage repayments. Right? They think of it that way. And that's how they get the cost of a home. They don't think of the cost of the home first and then how much they should be paying for that home. They don't go to a bank and say, hey, I want a home that costs $100,000. They do go to a bank, they go to the MIC and they say, I can pay $1,000 a month, help me out here. And the MIC will try to make this work for the most expensive home as possible. So these three groups are actually all to blame, but there's another group that's to blame, and it's a sub-niche of realtors. Now, realtors, you know, are the middlemen between the home buyer and the home seller. They are licensed, they are regulated. In Vancouver, what you're seeing is a group of, they're not realtors, in fact they will say outright to the homeowner, the current homeowner, I'm not a realtor. You don't have to pay me any commissions. I'm cutting out the middleman and I'm connecting you with the buyer directly. I am what's called a wholesaler. Now, wholesaler, like I said, is not a realtor. These wholesalers are unlicensed, unregulated, but even though what they're doing is illegal, they're not, these rules are not being enforced by the Canadian government. So what are they doing that's so bad? Well, they're going to homeowners, and a lot of these homeowners are older people. And older people are less apt at making good decisions in their older years, of course. So let's say I'm a wholesaler in Vancouver, and you're Barbara, 88 years old, who has been living in Vancouver all her life, and you bought your home at $50,000. And I walk up to you, I knock on your door. This is my job. I just knock on people's doors and I say, hey, I'm not a realtor. I can cut out a middleman. I can put you in a better home. I can double or triple what you originally paid for that home. And we could all do it right now. So in the end, what happens is these wholesalers trick a lot of people into selling their homes for a lot less than what they actually could have gotten for those homes. So your $50,000 home, I'm going to give you $300,000 for it. But actually I'm going to sell it for $700,000. And I'm not directly selling it, I'm just the middleman, truthfully, and I'm making a commission. So it's the same as a realtor. And in many cases, these wholesalers won't say, let's sell your home. They'll say, What would you say if I could move you into another home and give you $200,000? What they do is they move you out of the prime real estate area into a home of lesser value, and they give you cash up front. And it sounds like a good deal for you, but again, they're ripping you off. So you got 4 people. They're all making housing purchases. They're all kind of smoothing the pipes here, greasing the pipes so that housing purchases can move more quickly. And that's all driving up a housing bubble in Canada's major cities, such as Vancouver. Now this bubble cannot last, and in the next video I'm going to explain exactly why it cannot last, and, well, watch it.